Pope Leo arrived in Spain yesterday for a week-long trip. On Wednesday, he'll visit one of the country's most popular sites, the Sagrada Familia Church.
Standing in the heart of Barcelona, this breathtaking landmark, the Sagrada Família, has recently become the tallest church in the world. But when its construction began back in 1882, almost no one could have imagined it would take 144 years to get there. It outlived its creator, survived 2 world wars, the Spanish Civil War, financial crises, and decades of engineering challenges that many believed could never be solved. Then, on February 20th, 2026, it finally reached its planned height of 172.5 meters, exactly as its creator, Antoni Gaudí, had envisioned. But why did it take nearly a century and a half to turn Gaudí's vision into reality? And after all this time, is the Sagrada Familia truly finished? This is the untold story of the world's tallest church. Let's dive in. The birth of a masterpiece. In the early 1880s, Barcelona was changing faster than ever. New factories were making some people incredibly rich, while thousands of others struggled to survive in poverty. At the same time, crime was rising, protests were becoming more frequent, and the city was becoming more divided than ever. According to many religious leaders, there was only one reason behind it all. Barcelona was slowly losing its faith. That's where a man named Josep Maria Bocabella comes in. Bocabella was a deeply religious bookseller who believed Barcelona needed more than another church. His group planned to build what was called an expiatory temple, a church built as an act of repentance for the sins of society. But there was one condition that would shape everything that followed. The project could never rely on government money or state support. Every single stone would be paid for through ordinary people's donations. If those donations stopped, the construction stopped too. On March 19, 1882, the first stone was laid. The architect was not Antoni Gaudí, but Francisco de Paula del Villar, who designed a simple neo-Gothic church that could be built without too much trouble. Gaudí was there that day, but only as a young assistant watching from the sidelines. No one imagined that within a year, everything would change. After repeated arguments over costs and materials, Villar resigned. The job was first offered to another respected architect, Joan Martorell, but he turned it down and recommended his 31-year-old assistant instead, Antoni Gaudí. By the time Gaudí took over, the church's underground crypt, the lower part beneath the main church, had already been completed. It may not sound important now, but those very foundations would later create one of the biggest engineering challenges. For Gaudí, however, they marked a new beginning. Many people believed he would simply continue, but he did the exact opposite. He put the old designs aside and began imagining something the world had never seen before. He wasn't interested in copying other churches. Instead, he looked to nature for almost every answer. Tree trunks showed him how columns could carry enormous weight. Honeycombs inspired ceilings that were both strong and light. Even the spiral of a snail shell became the model for his staircases. As Gaudí once said, "The straight line belongs to men, the curved one to God." It was how he turned those ideas into a real building. Remember, this was the 1880s. There were no computers, no engineering software, and no modern 3D models. So how do you calculate whether a gigantic stone church will actually stand? Gaudí came up with a brilliant solution. Inside his workshop, he hung dozens of strings from the ceiling and attached tiny lead weights to them. Gravity naturally pulled each string into a perfect curve. Then he placed a mirror underneath the model. Looking into it flipped the model upside down, revealing the exact shape of stone arches that could support themselves without massive external supports. It was about to face challenges that Gaudí had never imagined: the years of chaos. Antoni Gaudí devoted his life to a single dream. He spent so much time at the construction site that, in his final years, it became his home. By 1926, he had completed the entire underground crypt, the apse behind the altar, and 4 towers of the Nativity facade. But then, everything changed. On June 7, 1926, while walking to church, Gaudí was struck by a tram. Dressed in old, worn clothes and carrying no identification, instead of being taken to a major hospital, he was sent to a charity hospital. By the time people realized who he really was, it was too late. Antoni Gaudí was dead. After more than 40 years of work, less than a quarter of the Sagrada Família had been completed. Losing Gaudí wasn't just losing the architect. It meant losing the only person who truly understood his design. He hadn't left behind a complete set of blueprints. Much of his vision existed only in plaster models and unfinished sketches. Then, another problem, one that had existed from the very beginning, suddenly became much worse: money. Because the Sagrada Família was an expiatory church, it could only be built using private donations. It couldn't rely on government funding or public money. If donations slowed down, construction slowed down too. Sometimes it almost came to a complete stop. But then came the biggest disaster. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War broke out. During the chaos, Gaudí's workshop was attacked. His drawings were burned. The large plaster models he had spent decades building had been smashed into thousands of pieces with hammers. Many of those broken pieces had even been thrown out of the workshop windows during the attack. For many people, it looked like the end. Because even if someone wanted to continue the project, how could they? The situation became so serious that many people began asking a difficult question. Should this project even continue? Or had Gaudí's dream died with him, rebuilding a lost mind? For years, it seemed as though Gaudí's dream had come to an end. One of them was architect Francesc de Paula Quintana. In 1939, after the war, he took charge of the project and began gathering every fragment that could still be found. Piece by piece, the team sorted through thousands of shattered plaster fragments, trying to work out where each one belonged. But the broken models weren't their only clue. Luckily, before his death, Gaudí had already completed the Nativity facade, the front entrance of the church dedicated to the birth of Jesus. Above it stood 4 finished towers, representing the apostles Barnabas, Simon, Jude, and Matthias. They became the team's greatest source of answers because they were still standing exactly as Gaudí had built them. Architects carefully measured every curve, every angle, and every stone. They believed Gaudí had hidden the rules of his design inside the building itself. And they were right. Instead of using simple shapes like squares or straight walls, Gaudí designed his church using complex forms found in nature. These shapes, called hyperboloids, paraboloids, and helicoids, may sound complicated, but they all follow precise mathematical rules. Once the architects understood those rules, they could finally begin recreating parts of the church that Gaudí had never lived to build. But in the middle of all this rebuilding, one of the most controversial debates surrounding the Sagrada Família, not on the construction site, but among architects themselves. Critics, including architect Oriol Bohigas, argued that after Gaudí's original models had been destroyed, no one could truly know what he intended. Continuing the project, they said, would no longer be Gaudí's work. That debate over the cathedral's authenticity has never fully disappeared, and it continues even today. But while the arguments continued outside, architects like Francesc de Paula Quintana kept doing their work. For them, there was a much bigger problem to solve. Because even after they had figured out what Gaudí wanted to build, they still had no idea how to build it. And that challenge would push modern engineering to its limits. The greatest engineering challenge. To understand why this was so difficult, we first need to see how most Gothic cathedrals were built. They relied on massive stone supports outside the walls, called flying buttresses. Think of them as giant stone arms that carried the weight of the roof. He wanted the church to support itself from within. Giant stone columns would rise like tree trunks, then branch out near the ceiling, carrying the weight safely into the ground. It was a completely different way of building a cathedral. Gaudí planned 18 towers unlike anything the world had ever seen. And at the very center would stand the Tower of Jesus Christ. It was a breathtaking vision. It became one of the greatest engineering challenges ever attempted. The biggest problem was hidden beneath the church. Remember the underground crypt from the beginning of the story? Its foundations had already been built before Gaudí. No one imagined they would one day have to support the enormous weight of the cathedral's central towers. Ordinary stone wasn't strong enough to support the enormous weight of the tallest towers. Engineers eventually chose red porphyry, one of the hardest volcanic rocks on Earth, for the columns carrying the greatest loads. But even that wasn't enough. The church also had to survive powerful Mediterranean winds and even small earthquakes. Building Gaudí's masterpiece was no longer just about architecture. It had become one of the most difficult engineering problems of the modern age. For nearly 7 decades, construction continued, but only at a painfully slow pace. Then, as the 21st century began, everything about building the Sagrada Familia changed forever. The breakthrough. The breakthrough came when engineers finally had technology powerful enough to match Antoni Gaudí's imagination. Instead of shaping and stacking one stone at a time high above the ground, engineers completely changed the way the church was built. Most of the work was moved off-site to a specialized workshop in Galera. Giant computer-controlled CNC machines used diamond blades to cut each stone with incredible accuracy, because almost every piece of the Sagrada Familia had a different shape. Instead of lifting hundreds of individual stones into the air, engineers assembled them into huge curved panels before they ever reached the construction site. Each panel contained 16 precisely cut stone blocks, tightly locked together with hidden stainless steel rods. The process looked almost unbelievable. A crane simply lifted the finished panels into place. 8 of those panels formed one complete level of a tower, then another 8 were placed on top, slowly building the towers section by section. The new hollow stone design, reinforced with hidden steel, reducing the pressure on the fragile 1882 crypt foundations beneath them. The money problem was finally being solved too. Under Chief Architect Jordi Bonet i Armengol, the unfinished church was transformed into a major tourist attraction, rather than simply an active construction site, helped pay for the next stage of construction. On November 7, 2010, Pope Benedict XVI consecrated the unfinished Sagrada Familia as a minor basilica. That meant it had officially become a functioning Catholic church, where regular worship services could now be held. The ceremony also drew worldwide attention. The project had both the money and the technology to move forward at full speed. From 1882 to around 2010, it took nearly 130 years to complete about 60% of the Sagrada Familia. Engineers built almost all of the remaining 40% in little more than a decade. But the greatest breakthrough wasn't the cranes, it was the hidden system inside the stone that made the entire structure possible. The secret inside the stone. We just saw how engineers used rare red porphyry to carry the enormous weight of the towers. Finding a way to do both at the same time remained one of the biggest challenges standing in the way of completing. In 2014, engineers from the global engineering firm Arup, working with chief architect Jordi Fauli, introduced a solution that visitors would never see. They drilled long vertical holes and passed high-strength stainless steel cables through the center. Powerful hydraulic machines pulled those cables unbelievably tight, squeezing the stone together with enormous force. The Sagrada Familia still looks like a traditional stone cathedral. It behaves more like a modern skyscraper, able to absorb movement without falling apart. The beautiful stone Gaudí originally used, the original stone simply wasn't available anymore. So the builders began a worldwide search, eventually sourcing materials from more than 50 different quarries. Gaudí never wanted sunlight to simply pass through the windows. Glass artist Joan Vila Grau began designing the stained glass windows in 1999. The western side is transformed by deep reds and oranges, representing sacrifice and the final hours of Christ. The entire church seems to come alive, exactly as Gaudí once imagined. For the first time in nearly 144 years, his impossible dream seemed almost complete. But that leaves one final question. Is the Sagrada Familia truly finished? And if not, what exactly is still missing? The cathedral that changed history. On December 8, 2021, workers completed the 138-meter tower of the Virgin Mary, the second tallest tower of the Sagrada Familia. They placed a giant 12-point illuminated glass star, which lit up the Barcelona skyline for the first time. Then came an even bigger milestone. On February 20th, 2026, workers installed the massive 17-meter cross on top of the Jesus Christ Tower, allowing the Sagrada Familia to finally reach its full planned height of 172.5 meters. More than 143 years after construction began, Gaudí's masterpiece officially became the tallest church in the world. Gaudí deliberately designed the tower to stop just half a meter below Montjuïc Hill, the highest natural hill in Barcelona. He believed that no building created by human hands should ever stand taller than God's own creation. The timing made the moment even more meaningful. The year 2026 also marked the 100th anniversary of Antoni Gaudí's death. 100 years after he died without seeing his masterpiece completed, the Sagrada Familia finally reached the height he had envisioned. To mark the occasion, on June 10th, Pope Leo XIV led a solemn mass inside the Sagrada Familia and officially blessed the completed Jesus Christ Tower. More than 120,000 people gathered outside for the historic celebration. But here's something important to remember. Although the main towers and nearly the entire interior have now been completed, Gaudí's original vision is still not fully finished. Work is still underway on the Glory facade, the basilica's largest and most important entrance. Engineers also have to build its monumental staircase, complete the surrounding plaza, and finish several decorative sculptures and architectural details that Gaudí had planned from the beginning. On paper, those may not sound like major tasks, but in reality, they have become some of the hardest. The biggest challenge isn't engineering anymore, it's the city itself. Gaudí's final design included a monumental 60-meter-wide staircase and plaza extending out from the Glory facade. But over the last century, that space has been filled with homes, businesses, and busy streets. Building the staircase exactly as Gaudí envisioned could require the demolition of around 150 buildings and force as many as 3,000 residents to relocate. And if we take into account the rising housing crisis and fierce anti-tourism sentiment in Barcelona, the problem becomes far more complicated than it first appears. So in the end, what do you think? Should the remaining parts be built exactly as Gaudí designed them, even if that means changing the surrounding city? Or will the Sagrada Familia find another solution, just as it has so many times before? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you want more incredible mysteries, discoveries, and true stories like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.